Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome to today's web conference, Dynamics 365 Finance Tech Talk. Today's topic is credit management. My name is AJ and I'm going to be your moderator today. We're broadcasting this web conference through Teams live events and the audio can be heard through your PC speakers. Today's web conference is being recorded on behalf of the Microsoft Corporation. Participation in the meeting today indicates your consent to being included in the meeting recording. Attendees may access the web conference recording via the same registration link that was used to attend today's live broadcast. If you have questions for the presenter or need support, you can also use the Q&A panel located on the right-hand side of your screen. Our presenters will be responding to your questions during and at the end of the presentation. Now on to the presentation. Presenting for us today from Microsoft, we have Mike Faulkner, Principal Program Manager, and helping with Q&A, we have Pat Nolte, Senior Program Manager. Mike, over to you.
Great, thanks AJ. Yeah, this is Mike Faulkner and my colleague Pat is sitting waiting for your questions. Today we're going to talk about credit management, and just to get off to a good start here, there's been a lot of names out there for this product. It's part of an IP licensing agreement we had with Sable/DXC, and so the terminology we're using is just credit management. We have a little disclaimer out here for these kind of presentations. You know, you're going to see things as is. The good news is it's already being shipped. It's in 10.0.9, which is going through the PEEP process right now. So we are showing you live code and we're showing you real features and everything else. But disclaimer just says, you know, if something's different, that's the way it goes. And so anyway, it is in 10.09 and you can start using it as soon as the PEEP moves on to the next level. So what are we going to talk about today? So we're going to talk about enabling credit management and getting it all set up, getting it ready to work, how to manage credit limits using a business process, enable blocking rules and risk assessments that'll help you block orders based on credit information, and then place an order on hold and release it. The credit management is in feature management. So first thing you want to do before to set it up is you go into feature management and you just find credit management and enable it. That's all there is to it. Oops, sorry. So I've got a million slides out there. We're going to ship these slides to you, and it gives you all the key features for each of the areas we're going to talk about today. But we're not going to really spend time on a PowerPoint. We're going to spend time on a demo. So I'm going to go ahead and start doing the demo, and then as I go through the demo and stuff, you can post questions in the Q&A, and then Pat will go ahead and start answering those. I'll pause once or twice to kind of catch up on some of those questions. So credit management is not its own module. It is part of the credit and collections module. So you can see all the stars that I marked them as favorites, but in effect, all of these stars are new credit management menus. So this is all the extra functionality that you'll get in the product. And so to kind of get us started, I'm going to start with the customer, and I'm going to show you kind of some of the new information that we've got. If you notice at the top here, there's a new menu called Credit Management. And that menu has a couple menu choices. We'll talk about those in a second. The big change here is if you look inside the Credit and Collections tab, it used to have about 5 or 6 fields in it, and that's all there was. Now we've added over 20 additional fields that have more information about the credit process. So the first two fields were already there. The first one I wanted to talk about here is unlimited credit limit. So now instead of 0 being unlimited, now we actually have a checkbox that means unlimited. And then the second one here is exclude from credit management. You may have a situation where you have a customer that you do not want to go through credit management at all. So you can one-off on a customer, actually exclude them from this process. The next one down here, just like a customer group, there's now a credit management group. It's defined the way you want to define it. You can put as many credit management group names as you want, and this can be used as part of your blocking rules. And so if you decide to put people in groups, here's a place for you to do that. Kind of the core, though, of the credit management information is this column here called total credit limit. This credit limit is the same one you had before, but now notice that we allow you to store the credit limit in the customer's currency. So I'm going to show you a customer that's that has a different customer currency. Notice based on the exchange rates in our demo data, it actually converts the credit limit to the customer's currency, so you can see both of them at the same time. So you got the credit limit. Now notice there's a new thing called insurance and guarantees. So what insurance and guarantees are is like, you can insure your goods so that if something goes wrong, you get paid for them. For example, you have a container ship picking up a container in Asia, and it's going to come over to the United States. You take ownership of that container the minute it hits the boat. You want to make sure that that if something goes wrong, the boat sinks or whatever, that you get reimbursed. And so you can choose to enter these insurance and guarantees from your customer, or that you've created, and then determine how much of them are going to offset the credit limit. In effect, it adds this much amount into the credit limit. So we have an insurance policy here. It's got the policy information. The insurance policy is worth $50,000, and then I want to increase the credit limit by 100% of this number. So you could actually say I only want to increase it by 10%. So what that does is, by saying that, now that $50,000 policy is added to the credit limit. So you now have a total credit limit of $550,000. And then you notice down below there's a credit limit expiration date, which is used as part of your blocking criteria, and then the date that the credit limit was last changed. But there's also an additional credit limit I haven't talked about yet, and it's called a temporary credit limit. So what I'm going to do is show you a different customer that has a temporary credit limit. Now notice an extra field appears in here called temporary credit limit. The temporary credit limit, you can access them up here, and you'll see that this customer had a temporary credit limit from November of 2017 to January, and then another one from October till April 30th of this year. Notice that the second one is the one that's active. The limit falls in the date. When that happens, you'll see this field will show up, and this field will temporarily override this credit limit that is in the system. So instead of having $500,000, now the customer has a $600,000 credit limit, only for the period of time that I showed you in that credit limit list. So now they have a $600,000 credit limit. They have some insurance out there for $100,000 for a total of $700,000. So as you see, the hierarchy of credit limits is, take a look. Are there any temporary credit limits? If so, those override the standard. If not, just use the standard credit limit. And again, we have the expiration date and the change date. The third column here is just memo information. It's really part of the whole process of a credit manager managing their credit. You can store in here the date that you last reviewed the credit, and then the next scheduled review date. So you've got some information that you can filter on there. You also have something called an eligible credit limit. So when somebody becomes a customer and you're out checking them out, they may be eligible for a lot of credit. And so you can put that number here, but that number doesn't have to match the credit limit itself. They might be eligible for $700,000, but you've made a decision to be a little conservative until you get to know them, and you change the credit limit to $500,000. So this is just more information that you're storing about the credit process. It doesn't drive anything, but it's something you're storing to help you remind you what you worked on and how you came up with that credit limit. The next column here is status. There's a new status. It's a credit management status. These are all user defined. You can define whether or not, what kind of status you want, and when you set that up, it actually allows you to connect this status with the invoicing and delivery on hold status. So for example, if you wanted to, you could say this is hold and then turn this over here to invoice. But they're separate. This one is used in the blocking rules to help you block an order. It doesn't do anything else but that. So it's just part of the rules. And then you can have a status that goes along with it. You can make up as many statuses as you want, the reasons for that. So here's the status and here's the reason code. And then the next two fields, again, those are memo fields. If you sent something to a collection agency, you can click on here and say yes. It's just information. Same thing for title. If your customers have titles, you can say yes, and it'll just say yes, the title's held by us. Again, just memo information. But down here, there's something called risk, and there's a whole concept of risk in here that I'm going to talk about in a minute. Two of the elements that help you define the risk of a customer is how many years have they been in business, what years were they established, and how long have they been our customer. They've been our customer since 2011. So if you enter these dates can then be used to help define the risk of your customer. Now notice over here on the right hand side, these are fields that were already there as well. So we just simply moved the fields from where they were to the column on the right. So also notice that we've added a new credit statistics fact box. You just have to click on the refresh because we don't want to kill the performance of, if you're switching from customer to customer, we don't want you to wait. So you click on here, you've got highest balance, you got some days sales outstanding calculations, average balances. You got, it pretty much summarizes their credit information over here on the right hand side. The other thing that we want to take a look at here too is this thing called risk scores. And so these are optional, but you can actually use risk scores to define how risky a customer is and actually hold orders because of their risk and generate automatic credit limits because of their risk. So you can use it if you want to, and you don't have to use it if you don't want to. But risk scores are based on scoring groups that you create. So these there's 6 scoring groups here. You could create 10 or 1 or 2, whatever. You create the scoring groups and you create the value that is assigned to those scoring groups. So for example, if I took a look here at country, different countries have different scores. Let's say, for example, that you do business in the United States and Canada, but you do not do business in Europe at all. Not that the country of Spain is risky, more that it's risky to do business there because you don't have salespeople there or collection agents there or whatever like that. So you may decide that Spain is more risky, that Italy is even more risky than that. You might want to take a chance on Great Britain, but you're okay with Australia, Canada, etc. So the idea is that you define the risk, you define the scoring groups, you define what kind of risk number they're going to get. And we have some predefined ones like average balance and average days and country. This one that we marked as D and B is a custom one that was created. You can create a custom list of values and scores. But the point of this thing is it's really data that you create, it's data that you update, and it's data that comes up with risk scores that you create. You can update these by changing the fields here in the customer, or you can run a periodic task that updates risk scores as often as you want them to do. So for example, if their average balance or average days changes, that might change the risk. So therefore, if you're running this routine every week or every day or however, and it's updating these values, then the risk could change automatically. Now notice all these values get added up, you get a risk score, and that risk score gets translated into a risk group, and I'll show you how that works in a second. And then you can use these risk groups in actually defining whether or not you want to hold an order or not. So there's a lot of new stuff going on here in the customer. Let's go ahead and take a look at a couple other things here. There's a new concept called customer credit groups. So we've been looking at individual customers. Let's say you have a group of customers that are related. They have a West Coast office, an East Coast office, and a central office or something like that. You've got a customer that has a lot of related parties. In fact, it's better if they're related through the global address book, but they don't have to be. But what this does is you can create this group, give it a name, and give this group a credit limit. In this case, we have a 50,000 credit limit for that group. And then notice underneath there are 3 different customers in different legal entities on top of it that are part of this group. So now let's talk about the hierarchy of credit limits again, because now we've got another credit limit introduced. So if I have a sales order and I create that sales order for this US 002, the system looks for the occurrence of that customer in any of these groups. They can only be in one group at a time. You can only have them in like this group and no other group. But when it finds it, it says, oh, US 002 belongs to this group. So the first thing I'm going to do is see if the order plus all the other balances are below 50,000. If they are, I'll let it through. If they're not, I'll put it on hold. Now let's say that they are under 50,000, but one of these customers has, I say, 100,000 credit limit, and they're at like 40 or 45,000, and the order is more than 10. So what it says is, okay, that order could pass the 50,000 limit, but it won't pass the credit limit for this customer. So it checks the credit limit for the group. If it passes the group, then it checks the credit limit for the customer. And remember now, the customer can have a temporary credit limit or a permanent credit limit. So, all that gets taken into consideration before the order can be put on hold. And then let's take a look here at some of the parameters for setting all this stuff up, because we talked about customers a lot. Actually, first thing I'm going to do is go through these risk scores, and I'll come back to the parameters. So I talked to you about those scoring groups. These are the risks that you've set up. And notice how you can set them up. If their average balance is less than $5,000, they're not very risky, so they're 0. If they have $1 million balance, they might be very risky. What country, we talked about that. What D&B rating, we talked about that. How many years have they been in business? If they've only been in business less than 5 years, you might consider them risky. You can see that all of these elements have scores with them, and it's up to you as a customer to create these scores to make sense to you. We don't ship any scores out of the box. It's all up to you to figure out what makes sense. So if years in business is more risky than average balance, you might put higher scores in here than what average balance has. So in addition, we ship all of these calculations out of the box, and then you can do a user-defined one if you want. So the D&B one, for example, is user-defined, whereas average payment days, we have those calculations ready to go. So now you got the scoring groups. Let's talk about how you get to that. We'll take you to the next step here. How do you get to that range? How do you get to that group ID? So you added up all those scores. Now you've got a risk score. So from 0 to 30 is a low risk. 30 to 60 is a medium risk, and high is 60 to 100. So what that does is it takes that score up, takes all those 6 groups, adds up their scores, and then assigns this risk group to that customer. The reason you want to do that is, again, you can create automatic credit limits from this, or you can actually put orders on hold because of that risk group. So I'll give you an example of that. So if we go into automatic credit limits, so for the medium risk group, if their D&B score is A1, we'll give them 400,000. If it's A2, it's 300,000. If it's greater than A2, we give them 100,000. So you can see if you have like 100 customers or 1,000 customers or 2,000 customers, you may be able to handle that manually or do that with the team that you have. But you start getting into thousands of customers, it's going to be really, really hard to make sure they all have the right credit limits. So what you can do instead is create these risk values, analyze them based on their risk, and automatically create these credit limits based on these scores. So I'll show you how that works later, but in effect, that's what you're doing here with these risk scores. Now let's take a look at some parameters that drive it. So the collections parameter is now moved into the credit and collections. There's a credit and collections parameters. So that will include collections and then a new one called credit. So you'll see a lot of stuff going on in these parameters, and I'm going to go through a few of these. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I'll go through a few of them. Allow edit of sales order value after the order is released. So let's say you put an order on hold, somebody releases it, and then somebody goes in there and edits the sales value. You can define whether or not they're allowed to do that. It doesn't stop you in the order. It just stops you the next time you process that order. So if you confirm an order and it gets put on hold, and then you edit the value so it's higher or even lower or higher, and then you process it again, it'll put it back on hold again. Check customer credit group credit limit. So you might set up these customer credit groups and you decided, well, I don't like the way that works, or I temporarily want to turn it off, or however, or you want to stage it so it's off first and then turn it on later. Anyway, this controls whether or not customer credit group credit limits are actually checked. These two parameters right here are control the 2 of the blocking rules, and I'm just going to show you so you can turn on or off these parameters, if payment terms change and if settlements change. And I'm going to go ahead and talk more about that when I talk about the rules, but you can actually turn off 2 of those rules by just turning off these 2 parameters. Ignore credit limit expired rule when expiration date is blank. So when you load up this, if you're already a user of Dynamics and you've already got your credit stuff out there, we don't want to make everybody automatically go on hold. So what we've done is allow you to control what blank means. So, if you ignore blank, then the expiration dates won't matter. And then it gives you time to set up expiration dates, get those all set up, and then you can turn this parameter to what you want it to be, and then expiration dates are mandatory after that. Just so you're aware, we won't talk about it much today, but the credit limit management also touches transportation. If you have loads and you have an order that can be added to a load, if that order is going to be blocked because of blocking rules, you could actually automatically have it pull that order off the load. So that there's more detail about it in the documentation online, but that's what this is for. And the last thing is auto releasing. I'm going to show you a feature that you can run. You can have a batch, or you can just run it, that allows you to automatically release orders that have passed all the criteria. Once if they've been held and then that criteria is no longer valid, you can automatically release it. This defines what to do when you automatically release it, and I'll get into that detail a little bit later. The key to this whole thing is really the checkpoints. Where do you want to check the credit? You have to check it at a certain process, and you check a box here defining what those processes are. So I could say I want to do it at confirmation, but I don't want to do it at release to warehouse. So you can control which ones stop the order, and you can do posting or proformas if they allow a proforma. But the thing is, if you process orders pretty much in the same day or even 2 days, it'd be kind of tedious to have it stop at every one of these places. And so the concept in here is called grace days that controls that. So if I do a confirmation and it gets put on hold and I release it, I will then have 10 more days to get it through the rest of the process without it being put on hold. So for example, here, if I start with a packing slip, I will have 5 days with the packing slip to finish this up. So in other words, if your supply chain is fairly quick, you get the order, you supply it, you fill it the next day or two, you can check it for credit and then let it flow through the system quickly, only checking for credit once. Otherwise, if you turn off the grace days, it will check it at every point. This management statistics is just simply denominators for the calculations. And then down below, this credit limit information, this is already existing stuff, except for one, allow manual editing of credit limits. So in the past, you have edited credit limits through the customer record. You can still do that if you want, but if you want to use a business process, which I'm going to show you next, if you're going to want to use a business process where you create adjustments, review them, workflow them, and then once it's approved, then post those new credit limits, you can turn off the ability to manually edit credit limits and force all edits through this adjustment process. So you just simply turn it off, and then you will no longer be able to manually edit credit limits. You'll have to use the business process. So what I'm going to do is, before I move on to these credit adjustments, I'm going to take a couple questions. So Pat, if you want to let me know what those are.
Credit limit functionality, can it be used on project invoices and free text invoices, or does it only apply to sales orders? Okay, so the question is do the credit limits apply to free text invoices and project, or is it just sales orders? Credit management itself, the document that it does credit management on is just the sales order. However, we have modified the free text invoice so that it will actually use temporary credit limits and insurance. So that part of it where the credit limit gets changed, that is also available in free text invoice, but the free text invoice will not be checked for the rules that I'm going to talk about later. It's just the sales orders, and we do not check project invoices at all. So this is really focused around sales order processing, and then free text gets at least the credit limits themselves.
The configuration, is that per legal entity or shared across legal entities?
Is the configuration per legal entity? Yes, it is. So this configuration is all per legal entity. The only two things in this thing that are cross-company, the customer credit groups are cross-company. You can add customers across multiple companies to that group. And the credit hold list, I'll show you that a little bit later. When putting items on hold, there's a central list page for all credit holds in one location for all the companies that credit manager or credit clerk can access. There's actually two new roles, credit manager and credit clerk, and they are allowed to, the hold list that I'll show you here in a minute will allow you to cross multiple companies, and as long as you have access to them. Okay, so we're going to move on here. Thanks for those questions. So I talked about the business process, and so if you don't want to edit credit limits manually, which is kind of a pain if you have thousands of customers, we have a thing called credit limit adjustments, and you can only create temporary credit limits through this process. But you can either manually edit credit limits or turn that off, or actually change credit limits through this business process. I don't have it turned on, but you can also use workflow here, so you can actually create a credit limit adjustment, workflow it based on the entire batch or just individual credit limits lines, and then submit them to workflow. So when you create a credit limit adjustment journal, you have two types. It's either a credit limit adjustment or a temporary credit limit adjustment. So this one, it's a pretty simple form. What's the customer? It'll give you the old credit limit. It'll put it in here for you. You can't touch this one, but it puts it in here for you. And then you can add your new credit limit right here and then give it a new expiration date. You can also do the same thing for the customer credit groups. Pick the customer credit group. Here's their old credit limit. Here's the new one that you want. And here's the new expiration date. When you come up here, you can simply click on save and then post them. And so it posts them almost like a journal, but we don't want to call it a journal because journals are transactions. These are not transactions, financial transactions. They're just credit limits. But they are saved in, so this list of changes are saved. You post them, they disappear from the open list. They're all saved, but it does write the values in the customer record. So this value gets moved to the customer record. Temporary credit limits are very similar, except you'll see this credit limit and an old from and to date and a new credit limit and a new from and to date. Temporary credit limits are temporary, so they have a from and a to date. If you have an active credit limit out there, temporary credit limit out there, and you key in that customer, it will bring in that credit limit and the from date and the to date and allow you to change it. If there's not an active one out there, it will just put blanks here and then you can change it and add it as well. So you can actually do future temporary credit limits, through this process. So in this case, this one does not have a temporary credit limit, so there's no from or to date. But here's the actual credit limit that the customer has, and then you can add a new credit. This is a new temporary credit limit for this small period of time. Again, you just come up here and you post it. So that's fine for doing 1 and 2 and 3 or 4, but what if you have a bunch of people you want to do? So you can, we have a lot of capability for generating, to filling in this list. So when you see this generate button, you can generate all these adjustments with the from existing from existing customer. You have these parameters. Do I want to adjust it by a percent? You can put 0 if you want. If you don't want to just bring in their old credit limits, put a 0 adjustment value. What's their new expiration date? Or do you want to make it relative? I want to add 6 months. And then you can actually filter on certain customers and other data. But what happens when you run that is it'll generate this list of adjustments. They're not posted, they're not active, they're just a list of adjustments that you're working on. And again, you can put in workflow, so you could send this big list off to someone. They could actually approve the whole thing, or they could approve each individual line, and then you complete the workflow that way. So you can come in here too, and let's say this one right here, you're thinking, well, I don't know why it was 0, but I don't really care about it. You can remove it out of here. And so you can work this list, get a list of people in here, work this list, and then when you're all done, you post it. And so this is just like the other one I showed you, but it actually allows you to generate from existing customers, from existing credit groups, a list of items to post. And then I was talking about automatic credit limits. That's where this one comes in. Same process. I'm going to generate a list automatically, but in this case, I'm simply going to be looking at those risk groups. So if all the automatics that you've created, it'll only pick up the customers that match those criteria, the lows and the mediums I had out there. It'll grab those, and then when I put in a new expiration date and click OK, I'm not going to do it here, but click OK, it would generate a list of all of those customers that have an automatic credit limit calculation and actually calculate the credit limit that you specified and put it in here. Again, you can workflow it, approve it, delete guys you don't want it, delete customers you don't want in there, that kind of stuff, and then post credit limits. All right, so that's the business process we talked about. Again, it's optional. If you want to just edit the credit limit, you can, but it's mandatory for temporary credit limits. You must put those through this process. All right, so now you're all set up with your customers, but you still haven't put anything on hold yet. So I'm going to show you how that works. There are 9 blocking rules. 7 of them show up in here, and then 2 of them are based on these rankings. So I'll show you the first one. It's called rank payment terms. So when you talk about a customer has a default payment term. Let's say it's net 10, or net 10. And when you create a sales order, that net 10 shows up. That's what you expect, is because that's what you defined as their default payment terms. But let's say, for example, the customer really puts the gets the sales order clerk and pushes them really hard and says, hey, I want more credit. And so the sales order clerk, for some reason, says, okay, I'll give you net 45. Well, so that's bad because net 45 is a lot more time than net 10, and you didn't authorize that. So what you can do is say, I'm going to rank these payment terms. And if the payment term that the customer has a different ranking than the one that the order has been changed to, then put it on hold. So in this case, net 10 might be the customer's one, and it's got a rank of 1, but net 45 has got a rank of 2. That means it's a higher rank, which means it's a better term for the customer, but that's suspicious to us, and we'll put it on hold. So that's the first rule of putting stuff on hold. The next one is discounts, very, very similar. If the customer has no discount and you put a discount on the customer, that's you're giving them better discounts, which may be something the credit people don't like. And so you can say that is a higher rank and it'll put it on hold. They might have 0.5%, you give them 4%. That's bad because you're giving them better discounts. I want to put that on hold and I want to review that before we run it through. So that's rule number 2. The rest of the rules will show up in this form here. It's called blocking rules. You have 7 blocking rules. You know, how many days are they overdue? What account status do they have? What are the terms of payment? When is, has their credit limit expired? How much overdue is their account? What is the value of a sales order? And how much of their credit limit have they used? So you'll see in this one, it's very much like posting profiles where you have a table, a group, and an all. It checks the table first, and so then it'll take action. So in this case, if you have customer US 01 and they are more than 0 overdue, then block their order. Same thing for US 05. But now take a look. Remember I talked about those credit management groups and those risk groups. So if they are in the credit management group called the major credit, it's a major credit management group, and they are in the high risk group, block them if they're 0 overdue. If they're in major but they're in the low one, give them 20 extra days to be overdue. Kind of give them some grace. Down here in the all category, you can again say all. If they're in the high risk group, don't give them any days. They're in the low risk group, give them 20 extra days. If they're medium, give them 10 days. If all of those don't match, if they're not in any groups or any risk groups, then the all one takes over and they have 20 days as the default. All of these work this way. So you've got table, group, and all. The account status, which I showed you those account statuses, we had hold and open. You can just say if that account status is a hold, block the order. Term of payment, if they're cash or COD, block the order. So this is in addition to that ranking that I told you about. That ranking checks for the ranking of the payment terms. This one checks for specific payment terms and we'll put them on hold. So credit limit expired. So the credit limit expiring doesn't by itself drive a credit hold. You have to define what expiration means. So in this case, we define that if they're a certain customer, they've got 30 days extra. Their credit limit has been expired for 30 days or more, then put it on hold. So you give them a little grace period here. So it expires, gives you 30 days to kind of make sure you check them out and make sure that they, you get it fixed and you get it updated. If they're in the high risk group, you give them 30 days. If they're in the low risk group, give them 90 days. But if they're not in any of those groups, here's the all, give them 40 days. So again, kind of that table group all thing. Overdue amount is a little different. It's a combination of how much are they overdue and how much of their credit have they used. So for this case, for this customer, if they are overdue by more than 10,000 and they are over 80% of their credit limit, then put it on hold. Now the sales order one's a little special, and it also gives me a chance to talk about these exclusion rules. I haven't talked about them yet. As we take a look at this, skipping this last one here. In this case, we have table. So this customer, if their order, well, first of all, for all customers, if they have an order greater than 500,000, then block it. But now we have something called exclusion rules, and these exclusion rules work for all of these blocking rules. And it's just that these are the only place I have it in the demo data. The way it works is table, look at blocking, then table, look at exclusion, then group, look at blocking, then group, look at exclusion, and then table, look at block, and then all look at blocking. There's no exclusion for all. And it takes it in that order. So, if you have a blocking rule a table rule for US 01 that blocks them, and then you have an exclusion second, the blocking takes precedence over the exclusion. So in this case, table, table is earlier than all, so it's going to look at table first, and it's going to say, oh, US 001, exclude any order that they have less than 20,000. So just exclude it. So that way, it is excluded from this check. For US 003, it's 15,000. For the major credit management group, it's 10,000. So it has to get through all of these before it hits this default, which is blocking greater than 500,000. The last one is a very special one. That's why I held it for last. There's a all exclusion that also has this checkbox on the right, and this is something that was provided when we licensed this product. Customers wanted the ability to not even pay attention to any of the rules, any of the 9 rules I've talked about, not pay any attention to any of them for small orders. So if you have this blocking rule called all, exclude all orders less than 1,000 if this checkbox, in other words, release the sales order if this checkbox is on, because it's a special situation. So all these tiny orders, we don't want to check the credit. We're just going to let them go through. So in this case, if you have this one line with a number and this checkbox, it is first above all 9 rules. And if it passes this, if this exclusion is true, it will not hold the order for any reason. After that, all these other ones really just pay attention to the order. The last rule here is the credit limit itself. So credit limits don't by default get checked anymore. You have to have a rule. So if you have the error set to warning, it checks these rules. If you have the warning checked to error, it automatically checks for 100% and then comes in and checks for additional rules. So this is how you can check. So you could change the rule to say, I'm only going to check credit limits when they're 80% instead of 100%. But our demo data is set up to do it at 100%. So now you see there's a lot of setup here, but you've set up 9 different rules to allow you to block an order. Okay, so how do we block those orders? So let's take a look. So when you go into a sales order, you get a sales order, or you go into a sales order and you create the sales order just like you want to create the sales order. So you add a bunch of lines like we've got here and everything else, but behind the scenes, I've actually changed the discount to be the wrong discount, and I've done a couple other things. And so you would take this order and you do all your normal stuff. Let's say you confirm this order, and when you confirm it, it's going to come in and it's going to process the order just like it normally would if you confirm or pack or pick or release to warehouse, whatever invoice, whatever you're doing. It's going to do the normal process that it would normally do, but now you'll see this error came up, and this error says order has been sent to credit management. So what that means is this order now is on hold. And to find out what's going on with that, down below is a new tab called credit management. So if an order is stuck here and an order taker doesn't know why, you can see that it's been placed in credit management, and here's the hold ID, so they can actually take a look and see what's gone on. They can see it has not been released yet. There's no reason for being released, and it hasn't been rejected as well. So now we've got this order out here that's on hold. So what do we do? So also you can, if you want to, and you have access to this menu, you can go to the credit management list right from here. In addition, if you want to, you can force an order on hold without any of the rules. But instead of that, I'm going to show you some of these hold lists. You can look at all the holds, just the open ones, just the closed ones, or holds due for review. So when you look at these holds, here is a list of all your holds. This is that global list I talked about. So it'll show you all the different companies, customers, and what companies they're in. And notice this review date. This date is something that you can add manually. So not only is this item on hold, but you could add the date that you reviewed it or the date that you want it reviewed in the future, but you can actually do it by review date as a manual thing that you can add. So notice this column called active. Anything with a checkbox means that it is still waiting to be released. It's still on hold. You can see the order that came from, the amount, the sales total, what document was sent here. So, I sent confirmations. I've set a packing slip here. What the date, what's the expected shipping date, what term of payment was used, what customer, etc. And if it's part of a customer credit group, that shows up here as well. And then over here, you can see the reasons, the hold reasons, and this one says multiple, because you can have up to 9 reasons. And then if it's been released, you can see who released it, or what the reason was, who released it, and the date it was released. So now we've got this thing on hold. Why was it blocked? Well, there's two places to look at that. One, you can come up here, and it tells you that two things happened. Credit limit was expired, and the term of payment was increased. Or you can come over here, if you like this better, and you can use this fact box, and it'll tell you the same thing. So different orders do different things. For example, this order, it was blocked on all 9 of them. It's in really bad shape, so there's a lot of work to be done. So you've got a list of these orders, and you can do a couple things. First thing you do, you can reject it. You can say, hey, I'm just going to reject this order back to you, and you're going to have to fix the stuff yourself. You just give it a reason, and then reject it, which I'm not going to do here, but just reject it. Or you can release it. And so really that's the two functions that a credit manager has. And you can go check the order or the customer. You can do all your work to check out why it was. If the effective date was, the expiration date was there, you can go fix the expiration date, all that kind of stuff. You can manually fix everything you want, and then you can come in here and release it. So first, when you release something, you pick a reason. The reason is mandatory, but it remembers the last reason, so you can do it that way. And then you can release the order either with posting or without. Without posting, what it does is it just marks the order as released, so that if you go back to the order and redo the confirmation or redo the packing slip or the invoice or whatever, put it on hold, it will let it through, even though it still has the problems or whatever. It will, when you say release, it then frees it up from all those blocking rules, and it won't check them again. It's done. It's been released. If you release with posting, not only does it do the releasing I just told you about, but it'll actually post it with the same parameters that you'd use to put it into this list. So if you had packing slipped it and tried to do a packing slip and it put it on hold, it remembers all those parameters. It remembers partial shipments. It remembers multiple shipments together. It remembers all that stuff, and it'll post, not only release the order, but post it like you tried to do when it put it on hold. So if I want to take this order here and I just want to release it without posting, if I say release, it just clears the release. If I'd done it with posting, I would have seen the confirmation dialog. I would have clicked OK, and it would have gone off and done the confirmation. And then that fast tab I showed you on the sales order at the bottom there, it would now show you who released it, what day it was released, all that kind of stuff, and you can go ahead and process the order. Now you're going to have quite a few. You might have quite a few items on hold, and there are situations where people pay their bills. You update their effective credit limit or their effective their expiration date. All that kind of stuff. You fix the problem, whatever, and you don't want to have to go through each one of these lines and manually click on the line and then release it and post it and all that kind of stuff. So there's this concept up here called evaluate for release, and you can run this manually or you can run this in batch. Run it asynchronously. You can do it a couple different ways, but process blocking rules will process all of the active credit holds and see if the rules have been cleared. So you could set this up to run once a day or once every 2 days or whatever like that. But what it does is it says, okay, this second line right here, it's still active. I'm going to check and see if those rules have been cleared. And if it does, it goes ahead and releases it. And I don't know if you remember that parameter I showed you. It says, what do you do when you auto release? It automatically has a reason over there, and it actually has you can define whether or not you want to release it with posting or without posting. So if you process all of these active holds, it will release them based on that criteria and the parameter, and then it's all done. You don't have to release it manually. You can also release selected lines, and so you can pick a line here and just check that one line and see if the rules have been passed. Again, in batch or manually. So once you've done all that, really that's kind of all that credit management does. You've got your list of orders, you've released them. So if you release them without posting, the invoice process can come in the middle at that night and pick it up and process it. But that's pretty much the process that we've gone through, which is, set up your customer information, your credit limits, adjust your credit limits, set up your risk, set up your rules, run your sales orders, and then release them with or without posting. So before I move on to kind of a last slide I want to talk to you about, Pat, any more questions we want to?
Could you explain the hierarchy of the different credit limits, temporary, customer group, and regular?
Okay, so can I explain the hierarchy of those credit limits again for groups, temporary, and credit limit? So the number one thing that gets hit is the customer credit group. So if the credit group has a credit limit, that's checked first. If you belong to it, you have to belong to it. If that passes, then it checks your individual customer credit limit. So you have to pass the group one and the regular one. For example, you could have a customer group of 1,000, but each individual customer has 5,000 each. It's just that you've limited the group to 1,000. So it's credit group first, then it's then it's the customer, and on that customer, it's the temporary credit limit first, including insurance. And if there's no temporary credit limit, then it's the customer credit limit, including insurance, that it checks. So that's the hierarchy of the three credit limits.
Can you explain how the credit check values work with the picking list?
So when you're doing, actually what happens with the credit limits is when you are doing a picking list, it looks at the sales order total and checks it at that point as if almost like you're doing a confirmation. So when you try to put it in a pick list, it'll stop it and say, can't do that, this order failed the credit limit test. And then it puts it in this list. And then if you release it with posting, it'll actually go ahead and put it on the pick list.
For project orders, will the blocking rules apply, or is it just excluded from the invoices? What's the difference between the invoice and the order?
So the project invoice has more than orders on it. So the question is how does it on project, how does it work? Does it affect the project invoice versus the order? The project invoice is not affected because it has fees, orders, PO, it has all sorts of stuff on it. It isn't even looked at that level. The order might get put on hold because the order itself will go through the rules. So the functionality may stop the order, but it's not going to stop the project invoice itself. It just may stop the order.
When looking at credit limits and across companies, is it always using the MST currency?
So looking across companies for the customer group credit limits, it's using the currency of the order, and then converting it to whatever it needs to do to come up with the right credit limit.
The new fields out of the customer data entity, are they part of dual right?
Are the customer entities part of dual right? We basically extended customer V3. So all those new fields are in customer V3. The only one that isn't in dual right now is the temporary one, because that's in a separate table by itself. So the credit limits themselves are just all that other data that's in that customer V3 is just an extension of V3. So customer V3 is used, it'll pick up those fields, but the temporary credit limits at this point in time are not brought over there yet. You'd almost have to have, like if you're using CRM, there is no functionality over there for temporary credit limits, and so we kind of have to have some functionality that matches to really make that work.
On the expiration dates and the due dates, are they required or can they be left open?
The expiration dates and due dates, can they be left open? The expiration date can be left blank as long as that parameter is set off to ignore it. Then yeah, you can just leave it blank. If you change that parameter to not ignore expiration dates, blank equals very old. So then it will actually block you. But if you turn off if that parameter ignores, set to yes, then you don't have to worry about that one. The from and to dates are on just temporary credit limits. Those are already always paid attention to. You can't turn those off. The only thing you can do is delete that temporary credit record or change it or edit it using the adjustments, and then you can edit that date and expire it or wherever you want to do it. But those from and to dates are just for temporary credit limits.
And the blocking rules, do any of the blocking rules block a payment from the customers?
Any of the blocking rules block a payment from the customer. No, credit management doesn't reach into the payment journal. It's not anything there. It's all about the sales order. So it's looking at the sales order saying, are you overdue? And based on your current balance and your current AR balance, are you overdue? And if you're overdue, then it stops it. It doesn't. So the thing of it is so you could have a customer with a balance, and have a payment journal out there, but you haven't posted it yet, they will go, it'll put the order on hold, but you can then post the payment journal. And then if you reran these credit, reevaluated the credit for a release, it would see that you're no longer overdue, and then it would go ahead and and automatically release it if you want to, but it doesn't connect to the payment journal at all. That's it.
You got a lot of questions, I can't keep them.
Okay, well, I'm going to go back and, sorry, I'm going to come back here. I got one more slide to tell you about. Okay, out in the market, there's all sorts of names for this thing. We licensed the IP from DXC Sable, and it was called Enterprise Credit Management. I've heard Advanced Credit Management. I've heard all sorts of things. It's just called Credit Management. So whenever we talk about this thing, it's just going to be Credit Management. Those other names aren't going to go. So this is what it's called, just so you guys know that. The documentation is already out there. So we're at PEEP right now. So that's preview. If you're part of the PEEP process, you can actually get the code. It's part of the PEEP build. So even if you aren't, the docs are out there. So you can use the Learn More link on Feature Management. So turn it on and click on Learn More, or just search for Credit Management. There's kind of a Credit Management overview. If you click on that, you'll get a list of others. There's over 30 pages of documentation out there now on how this works, and there's a lot of good detail. So you can actually start looking at it right now. So DXC, or they used to be, they acquired Sable. They were the original creators of Enterprise Credit Management, and they have created an update for their Dynamics 365 Finance customers. So they are responsible for that. They'll be working with you on that. They have already been reaching out to their customers and doing webinars on how that works. So so you aren't stuck with nothing. You can actually get your stuff over from your current usage of Enterprise Credit Management over to the new Credit Management in 365. We did work with them on something, and so what we were worried about is, first of all, we have tested this on a live customer to make sure that we didn't blow things up. What we were worried about is that somebody's got the DXC version with a config key turned on, and then they go to Feature Management and turn it on, and then all of a sudden they got two of everything and all sorts of different things out there, which is not what we want to happen. So we put a test in our software that DXC has to send a yes to, and we're sending out kind of this signal saying, is the Enterprise Credit Management config key turned on? And we won't get a message unless you're using that software from DXC, and they are adding code that says yes, we're turned on. And if we see that, we will disable we will not allow you to turn on credit management with Feature Management. We'll stop you from doing that. And again, it's just to make sure that we don't get this confusion of code. So what will happen is config keys on. They are providing, as part of their upgrade, a script that you'll run, or a menu basically that you run that'll move your data into the new system. Then you go in and turn off their config key. Then Feature Management will see that and say, oh, okay, now it's okay for me to turn on Credit Management. So we've done it that way just to kind of protect everybody from accidentally, doing two different things. We have a private Yammer group for Credit Management. We're going to open it up to the public pretty soon, probably after this Tech Talk or very shortly after that. It's just called Credit Management, and it'll just give you a forum for asking more questions and stuff like that. So before we finish, any more questions that we want to?
Got 38 questions in queue that I'll continue to answer.
Okay.
So just hang tight. If you're waiting for an answer, we're getting to them as quickly as we can.
Okay, so you guys have been real busy. Pat's got 38 questions to answer, which we won't really have much time to do that. So what we're going to do is Pat's going to take the time to answer those questions, and you can follow up an email with him as well if you want to get your questions answered. So anyway, I just want to thank you guys for listening, and I hope you enjoy the new software, and that's all we have for today.
And thank you, Mike. I would like it if I could please draw everyone's attention to the chat window, where I have posted a link to a short survey. Our presenters value your feedback and would greatly appreciate you taking the moment to fill out the survey. The survey scores are on a scale from 1 to 5, with 5 being the highest score possible. I want to remind everyone as well, the recording and the copy of the presentation deck will be available within 5 business days. Please look for an email from Worldwide Learning that will include details on how to access them. I'd like to thank our presenters, Mike and Pat, and thank you, the audience, for logging in and joining us today. This concludes today's web conference.